Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello and welcome to a show about one of the oldest art forms in the world, storytelling. My name is Mary Fellows and I'm here with some knowledgeable guests who are going to talk with us about storytelling. And I'm here because I'm the producer of Riverway Storytelling Festival. Riverway is a week-long festival in the Capital District and it's 7 days of great storytelling. This year it's going to be April 4th through April 10th. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but first of all, I'd like you to meet my guests. We have Marni Gillard here. Please meet Marni Gillard. Marni is a full-time professional storyteller from Schenectady who came to storytelling after nearly 20 years as an English teacher in middle school. We're going to plumb that knowledge in just a minute, Marni. In addition to her schedule of performances, Marni also uses her teaching abilities in workshops and in residency with students. So welcome, Marni.
Thanks, Mary. Great to be here.
We also have joining us Frank Wendt, who is a storyteller who works alone and also with his wife, Dee Wendt, as part of a storytelling duo called Frankly Speaking. Frank comes to storytelling from the corporate world, which adds some interesting twists to his stories. And he is also both experienced and adept at working with elder storytellers, which we'll talk more about later as well. So welcome to you, Frank.
Thank you.
Marni, let's start with you. Over the years, since I've been involved in storytelling, I talk about it, and people often have misconceptions about what storytelling is. Can you help clear that up for our audience?
Well, storytelling is basically simple communication between one person and another. When the storyteller is imagining a story, they speak what it is they're imagining and really use the energy of the listener to describe it, because we don't memorize our stories necessarily. And the listener will in turn make images and then make meaning from the story. Sometimes I can have a very different meaning from one of my listeners, depending on how the story hit us. But really, storytelling is everything from conversation across a dining room table all the way up to a staged performance, both kinds, and everything in between.
So we've talked a little bit then about what storytelling is and a little bit about where storytelling takes place. So it takes place in the mind. Really, we're forming images when we hear a story.
Absolutely.
So where physically does storytelling happen?
Wherever you get a minimum of two people together.
Yeah?
It can occur in a kitchen, it can occur on the porch, it can occur in a library, it can occur in a town hall, it can happen anywhere. We're working with seniors in Stephentown, and they describe what life was like back then. And if there were two men who had musical instruments and they met, immediately there would start to be a jam and people would come out and dance. Well, if you don't have the instruments, they would talk. Mm-hmm. And you're simply sharing the process, sharing your experience, and somehow telepathically transporting that image that you have into their head.
We often think about America in days gone by when people had front porches and there wasn't television and people spent time out on their porches, and a lot of what's reputed to have happened then was storytelling among families, elders telling to younger children, and that's how some of the knowledge and the history of the family was passed.
That's right. And values, lots of things get passed through storytelling, the way to be in the world.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so we've talked a little bit about what storytelling is. Let's now hear a story. Frank, you have one that you're going to share with us today, I think.
Not too long ago, I was downstate in the area where I was born and raised. For me, what was the old country, Brooklyn. I had a job doing some storytelling down there, and when the performance was over, since I was fairly close to where my old neighborhood was, I decided to go over, take a walk down memory lane, and see how much of what I remembered from my youth was still out there. Well, the house was still there. The big elm tree that used to be in the front yard was gone, and the stucco was a little darker. But other than that, that part looked fine. And I decided to walk up to the boulevard. I was getting hungry, and to see what shops were still there that I remembered, and maybe pick up something to eat. Well, there was a fruit and produce stand there, which my mother referred to as Tiffany's, because of what they charged for the produce. I never really knew what the name of the store was, but it was always called Tiffany's. And next to Tiffany's, there used to be Kaplan's Kosher Meats. However, as a reflection of the change in neighborhood demographics, Kaplan's Kosher Meats had become Cows and Sows. And on the other side, there had been a marvelous bakery, the 4-Star Bakery, where you'd go in there and you would just find this luscious, deep, sour pumpernickel and a vibrant rye and a delightful northern cornbread, but that place was also gone. Well, I went back to the produce place, to Tiffany's, and I picked up a navel orange, and it was almost $1.50 per pound for these things, a piece for these things, a piece. And I started to turn to the grocer and say, would you take $1 and I stopped. It's amazing. This orange had brought to the surface a whole flood of memories of my living down there and life with my father and my grandmother. See, my father was the first one to make it to this country. He came in as a late teen, took a number of technical courses, did quite well, got a nice job, got married. They bought a house in Brooklyn. My grandmother was still living in the old country, and it took a long time for her to get over here. I'm not sure if it was a problem with the paperwork or the fact that she didn't want to leave the land of her birth, but she didn't get over here until both my brother and I were born. Now, when she came over here, she had a bit of a problem with American customs and also with the language. She just didn't speak English very well at all. My father and my mother spoke quite well. They also were hard workers, and they were gone most of the time. So my father figured the best thing to do was to put his mother, my grandmother, to work, and the best thing to have her do was to cook for the family. Now, the cooking wasn't going to be a problem. The problem was the shopping. He thought about this for a while, and then a couple of weeks later, he took his mother in hand, and they walked up to the boulevard, and he introduced her to the meat store, and he introduced her to the produce stand, and he introduced her to the bakery, and he said, "Mama, we want you to do the cooking, but when you go shopping, just buy from these 3 places." I remember my grandmother, all 4'11" of her, heading out to do battle with the shopkeepers with her little wire basket with a squeaky wheel as she'd head off to the boulevard to face off against Kaplan, arguing over the prices of lamb chops and whether or not that little extra fat on there demanded a reduction in the price. She was an amazing bargainer with just a little bit of English, a little bit of Yiddish, and a great deal of body language. And then she'd go to the produce next door, and she'd speak to Klein at Tiffany's, and she'd get amazing prices on all the fruits and the vegetables. And then she'd go to the bakery, and she'd show them how it was not right that you charge the same thing for those bagels that have so few poppy seeds and sesame seeds. And that challah over there, that's clearly the first one out of the oven, and by definition the oldest, and you shouldn't charge as much for that. She did very well with shopping. Well, she was happy. We were happy. She cooked very well. I ate well, possibly a little too well. And my grandmother never realized that at the end of the month, my father would go down to the shops and pay up the difference between the regular price and the Sophie price.
Delightful story. Thank you, Frank.
My pleasure.
Oh, so that's an example of a personal story.
Yeah.
One that comes from your life, and there are other kinds of stories, and maybe in a little bit Marni will tell us perhaps a different kind.
I will. We
But-
didn't even plan it.
Yeah, but let's talk a little bit about the value of storytelling. Marni, you've written a book called Storyteller, Story Teacher,
Yes, I
The
have.
Power of Storytelling for Teaching and Living. As a former teacher, how do you think that storytelling can encourage reading and learning?
Oh, I wrote the book, Mary, because it changed everything in my classroom. When I began to tell stories, instead of just reading, I did love reading aloud, and I still love reading aloud. But there's something magical that happens when an adult is simply telling the story. Those images that I'm working on inspire the listeners to make images. And for reading, that's the work of reading, is making the images in our mind, connecting a story that's in print to our own life experiences. The reading went up a big jump just by the idea that we started telling stories. It was like strengthening that imaging muscle, imagining. But then when the students began telling stories as well, their vocabulary changed, their way of talking. When you're reading a story in a book and you're learning a story from a reading book, which many of them would go to the library and find a folktale, you're adopting a kind of grammar, a kind of tone quality to your voice that's built into the story that isn't the way we talk every day. And so it really affected the students, and their writing became better, their ability to articulate their own ideas became better. But more than anything, I think the big thing about storytelling is the way it connects people. So in a middle school classroom, where there's usually a lot of cliques and maybe a tad of bullying and all those things that can happen as adolescents are making their way in the world, something about storytelling brought us together, and we appreciated each other's stories, and we named, oh, that image moved me, and we responded to each other, and everything about our community changed. It was quite astounding.
And that's, if I may cut
Sure.
in here, that's because this is on a small scale.
Yeah.
But the same thing is on a worldwide scale, that when you learn stories and you learn other people's stories, you find out we're actually just one people.
Right.
Our stories are actually all the same. Dee and I tell a story entitled The Three Littles, and it starts off with a version from England, The Three Little Pigs. So we do the first little pig from England, then we do the second little hare, which is from Turkey, and the third little gosling from Italy, and it's the same story.
In all those different countries. Yes, we see that a lot in libraries, and I remember from some school projects too with middle school students is really seeing a very diverse group of students come together and start supporting each other in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do outside of that project.
We have a strong interfaith storytelling community in
That's
the
right.
Capital District, both an adult interfaith club, you might say.
Yes.
And then this will be our 6th year starting up in January, a teen interfaith storytelling troupe. And we've recently done a class at Siena College for adult learners, and we've taken our stories to various peace building camps, and kids have gone to some of interfaith conferences around the country, actually. It's been quite thrilling. And yes, you hear somebody's story and then you know them in a different way,
Yeah.
and they know you.
So much power around storytelling. And you have a story to share with us, I think. Would you please?
I do. And it is a traditional story from way back before we had books, although, of course, I got to learn it because it was written down. This particular story that I've learned is in many, many versions in the Irish storytelling tradition, but it's from a book by James Stephens called Traditional Irish Fairy Tales, and always love to plug that I find my stories in books, if indeed I do. Well, there's many stories told about Finn McCool. He was a great Irish hero. And when he was a boy, they say he was hidden away because his father had been murdered by another clan, and he had been leader of the Ardrí, the High Kings, Fianna, the great soldier troop that was highly skilled and highly educated. To be a king's soldier, you need to be well educated. So when he was murdered, the little baby was hidden away, his son, for fear that someone would try to take his life. Some say he was reared by his granny, who told him all the old Irish stories. Some say that he was reared by 2 women warriors who taught him all the skills he would need to be able to take his father's place someday. But wherever he was reared as a small boy, eventually he knew he had to find his way to a poet teacher. And when he was a young man, he found his way to the Boyne River, where Finnegas, a famous poet, lived. Now, Finnegas was very old by this time of his life, and when young Finn, who didn't go by the name Finn when he was out in the world for fear of his heritage being recognized too soon, he went by Demna as his name. When he came and saw Finnegas, he saw what an old man he was, and he was down by the river looking as if he were trying to catch a fish, but not doing very well. And the boy came up, "Can I help you, sir?" And the man said, "Oh, I do need help. I've been trying to catch this fish for the longest time." "One fish? A particular fish? How long have you been trying?" 7 years now. 7 years. And how do you know this fish is here?" "Oh, it's a prophecy. It's a prophecy, for my name is Finnegas, and someone whose name has Finn in it will eat this magic fish, the Salmon of Knowledge." "A salmon of knowledge?" the boy said. And where would he get his knowledge if he's a fish?" "Oh, from eating the acorns that drop from the magical tree in some hidden pool down along the Boyne. We've never found the tree, but we know those acorns are there. Maybe only the fairies know. And when the fish eats the acorns, all the wisdom of the world fills the fish, and I'm going to be the one to eat that fish, and I'll have all the wisdom in the world." Now, this was a boy who knew he had a destiny, and the idea of having all the wisdom in the world was very exciting. But for a time, he simply lived with the old man, and he began to learn stories and poems and genealogies and all the thing that the old man did teach him. And he came to love the old man dearly, dearly. He helped him keep his house and helped him fish as often as he could. And sure enough, one day, they pulled that fish together up onto the bank. And Finnegas' heart was pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe they'd finally done it. "Oh, boy, you've been such a help to me. Now you build the fire, and I'm going to rest, because I want to take the wisdom of the world in me with a clear and open mind and a rested spirit." And the boy was happy to help. He set the fire ever so carefully. He watched the flames rise. He built a spit so they could lay this giant fish across the flames. And then so carefully he turned it. And he thought truly by this point that he wanted that teacher of his to have all that wisdom, and that he was simply a part of this magical experience. And he turned the fish, and he turned the fish. But oh, the flames were so high and so hot it was starting to bubble, and the boy wanted it to be just perfect for his teacher. So as he saw one great big bubble coming up, he popped it with his thumb, and sucked his thumb because it was so burned. But his shout woke his teacher, who came running out, and both of them knew. Finn knew because something inside of him completely changed, as if his eyes were open to understandings he'd never had. And Finnegas, he looked at the boy, and he knew just from the way his eyes were gleaming with light. "What did you say your name was, boy?" Well, Demna, but There are those in my family that have called me Finn. They say it's for my fair hair, but maybe it's for my destiny. And the old man looks at him. I don't know whether to strangle you or take you in my arms. Come here, boy. And he did take the boy in his arms and held him tight, for he knew what it meant to have a destiny. Great poet that he was. And he held him at arm's length and said, well, there's nothing more I can teach you now, boy. Your destiny is to go off and find that king, find that Ardri, and tell him who you are, and tell him what you know about your history and about the destiny before you. What I know, said Finn, how will I do it? You just go and live, boy. That's all you need to do is live. But I would guess that in that thumb you burned, there's an awful lot of wisdom. So you get nervous, you feel like you need to know answers in the world. Put that thumb back in your mouth, and you'll have all the wisdom, all the knowledge of this great salmon. And off he went into the world. And there's many more stories about Finn McCool, but they'll be for another day.
Oh, thank you, Marni. Now, that's a story from your heritage, isn't it?
Well, I am Irish on both sides, so
yes.
a few generations
That's
back.
right.
But I've been to Ireland 6 times now. I just went my last time this
very
fall,
exciting.
and there's always new things to explore.
Very exciting. Thank you for that story. Frank, you and your storytelling partner and wife, Dee, are currently doing some storytelling work with seniors. What is the value, do you think, of elders telling stories?
Oh, they're such a repository for everything we need to know. I mean, working with seniors has been a delightful experience for us. They are so full of stories. They have the most colorful tales you can imagine. Their lives have been so rich, despite the fact that for most of it, a lot of them were very poor. But I think they're a valuable asset, and it needs to be tapped. It's being tapped to some extent through this StoryCorps, but those and that whole process should continue because there are memories there that need to be recorded. They are sort of our reset button, so that when we find that we're down low in life because we can't get the 72-inch TV, or we can't get the latest version of some iPod or something like that. Hearing the stories of the seniors tells us about what life's values really are, and how important family and shared experiences are.
And harking back to Marni's story, they're in a way like the salmon of all knowledge themselves. You know, seniors, we put all of this wisdom in our culture together, and we listen to our elders, and we will gain a knowledge as younger people, I think.
And just to say, from some of the work I've done with seniors as well, they might secretly value their knowledge, but they know in this world that's changing so fast, there's a sense of, well, what do I know? And when storytellers come along, or anybody, a young person comes along and says, tell me about when you were young, and they begin to tell, then you see them stand a little taller. And really, you want to hear my stories? And that's not just for seniors, that's for a lot of people. We tend to devalue our stories, and I've hardly heard a bad story when I've just naturally been telling people stories. You know, there's a lot of gold in those in those memories.
Yeah, and listening is such a strong part of storytelling. It's talked about as one of the 4 legs of the table of literacy, is the ability to listen and to comprehend what someone is telling us. And that's something that we all probably need to work on just a little bit more, is not rehearsing what we're going to say next in our head, but actually deeply listening to the person who's speaking.
Yeah, deep listening is a practice.
Yeah.
Because we are in a cut each other off kind of society today. You see it everywhere on TV, the argument shows and all that. But committing to listening deeply and listening a story all the way out, even when there's pauses and I'm not sure what came next, just giving the time to listen, it's amazing. It's been a joy for me, and to practice it and to share the idea of listening deeply with others.
And to let the seniors talk and tell their stories is very validating for them. It
Sure.
gives their lives added worth.
Well, not just seniors, but all of us,
Yeah.
you know, to be listened to and to be able to tell our own stories, for us to listen to your family's story, that sort of validates that experience for you as well and helps you remember your roots. So, well, let's talk about one of my favorite weeks of the year. Not that I'm prejudiced or anything, but this would be Riverway Storytelling Festival week. And that this year is April 4th through 10th. And this is a week-long storytelling festival. So 7 days of all kinds of different storytelling events. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's going to happen during those days. We're a little ways ahead of it now, but you know, April will be here before we know it. So let's start with what happens. And Marni, you were going to start with what happens like Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of that week.
Sure. Early in the week, the wonderful thing, because this is sponsored by the Library Association, is that we get to go out to various libraries and sometimes senior citizen centers throughout the Capital District, throughout the Albany area and surrounding areas. And local tellers, people like me, get to come and tell stories, and we have audiences of all kinds, sometimes big family audiences, sometimes just the old folks who want to come and hear a story. It all depends. You never really know exactly who's going to show up. But it's lovely, and oftentimes we even can have a youth storyteller come with us, so that children in the areas of the outlying storytelling libraries get to see that, oh, gee, a kid can get up and tell a story, well, maybe I can too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good. And speaking of student storytellers.
Speaking of student storytellers, Thursday mornings we have, I forget what it's called.
Story Walk.
Story Walk, where we set up our speakers, tellers throughout the State Museum. And then we get anywhere between 150 and 180 elementary school students coming through as classes. And they stop at each station, and the teller there tells them a story. And at one point, we have student tellers who will tell them the stories. So they get exposed to a number of different tellers. They get exposed to student tellers. Plus, also, a lot of them for the first time are getting exposed to the museum.
Yeah.
And that's very important.
And that's such a cool place.
Yes.
So it's good to bring them there. Thursday night, we moved to East Greenbush Community Library, where we have Our Favorite Stories, which is a storytelling concert, and it's the first time that the weekend featured tellers show up. This year, we're bringing in Joe and Jesse Bruchak, who are Native American storytellers from the Adirondack region. We also have Lynn Ford, who is an African American storyteller from Ohio. And we have Bill Harley, who is a singer-storyteller from Massachusetts. Some of you may have heard his name before. So that's all Thursday night. That kind of kicks off our weekend events and gets us on a upscale track to all kinds of more events. Starting Friday afternoon, we have a workshop for teachers and librarians. This is where we take these expert storytellers who have just a wealth of knowledge, and they do a workshop. And this year we have Joe Bruchak, who's going to do it for us. And then Friday night, Marni.
Oh, well, I'm excited to just hear about all that, Mary, because I didn't know all of those details. But Friday night is the ghost story night. And if you're young and you want just a little bit of a shiver, there's an early ghost show. And then later on, for those who are really ready for hardcore getting scared, we have a second show for those. And that's at the Gilderland Library.
Book library, yes.
Each year. It's a tradition, and we pack the place, so put it on your calendar.
Right. Saturday,
we're here at the William K. Sanford Library, starting in the morning with a workshop for experienced tellers being conducted by Bill Harley. We will also have a workshop for new tellers conducted by Lynn Ford. We have story swaps, where if you've been telling stories to your cat and it's about time to move out into the real world, this is the place to do it. Then we have lunch. Then we have student performances in the afternoon, a showcase featuring our tellers telling some of their favorite stories, followed by a juried showcase of regional tellers telling their stories. And then we rapidly run through dinner, and then we're off to Saturday evening's programs.
And Saturday evening is my favorite. I've been very lucky to be able to be the host on a couple of occasions. The giggles that come out of this audience, especially early on when we have some young listeners in the early concert, like a 7 to 8 kind of a concert, are just musical to hear, because all these very experienced storytellers, they know audiences and they can get us laughing. And then the second show, which is adult humor, to me often has a kind of wisdom with the laughter. We get to grin at our own foibles and recognize them in some stories, and then sometimes we're just slapping our knee with laughter too.
So Saturday night is Laugh-In Night.
Laughing night,
It's
absolutely.
usually in Troy at the Bush Memorial Center on the Sage campus. We've got lots of room there for everyone to come. So that's our big Saturday night. And Sunday night we wrap things up with a finale. It will be at Bethlehem Public Library, and this is where all of the featured tellers again come, and they've had a great weekend together, a great weekend with our audiences, and they give a wonderful finale that has people laughing and singing and clapping, and it's really a fun way to end the week. So what an exciting week, right? How can one stay away from that?
It's Riverway is something our whole Capital District should know about and be proud of. It's a wonderful festival.
And we should talk about where Riverway comes from. Riverway is a project of Upper Hudson Library System, which happens to be where I work. And Upper Hudson Library System is one of 23 cooperative library systems in the state. We're mostly behind the scenes. You might see us in the catalog that you use when you reserve your books, and you're looking in the library, browsing the library at 2 o'clock in the morning in your pajamas. That's us. We also run the delivery system that when you ask for books or other things from other libraries, that's what takes it back and forth and gets it to your home library. So that's Upper Hudson, but one of the more visible things that we do is Riverway Storytelling Festival. We also have a lot of help with Riverway. One of our big sponsors is Times Union. We have a lot of other sponsors who help us, and we're so grateful that this is really a community event. So we live in a busy world. Every weekend and every weeknight there is a lot that we can do as families or as individuals, lots and lots of choices. So why should our audience put Riverway or any other storytelling event like Story Sundays on their calendars to come to?
Well, storytelling truly changed my life. It's why I wrote the book and called it Discovering Storytelling for Teaching and Living, because when you start to claim, I've got a story, or, oh, I've been living a story. I grew up in a big family and we sang a lot, but when I've grown up and become a teacher, I realized even those songs were stories, and they were turning me into the person that I've become. And that's the thing about stories. We are so go, 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 and I even live a storied life, but I can forget some of the greatest values that are important to me. And hearing one story can turn my day around, can sometimes turn my life around.
And it is life-changing. The first date I had with my wife was at Riverway, was at Telebration, another storytelling festival, and I sat there and I said, I can do this, and I can, and I do.
And that has changed your life.
And that has changed my life.
That's great. Well, sadly, we're about out of time today. Marni, Gillard, Frank, Wendt, thank you so much for being here with us to have this great conversation about the role of storytelling in our world and the importance of telling all of our stories. Please join Marni and Frank, who will be performing at Riverway Storytelling Festival this year, again, April 4th through 10th. Our website is www.riverwaystorytellingfestival.org, and we hope to see you soon.